So now we'll work on problem 52 from chapter 1. In this problem, we are told to make a timeline based on our knowledge of chemistry, describing the research into the depletion of ozone layer by CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. So we can do that. So in the 1920s, a scientist by the name of Dobson began to measure ozone in the atmosphere. So this is the first time that we were able to see how much ozone was actually in our atmosphere. Late in the 1920s, for the first time, in 1928, chlorofluorocarbons were synthesized by Midgley. And so shortly thereafter, in 1935, people began to use them industrially. So refrigerators and air conditioning units began to use CFCs as coolants. Much later on, 35 years later, in 1970, people began to detect chlorofluorocarbons in the atmosphere. They began to realize that these things stayed around, they didn't just degrade. So they discovered in 1970 that they were still there. Later on in the 80s, from about 1981 to 83, people began to realize that ozone was being depleted, that the ozone levels were not as high as they used to be. So in 1987, 4 years after people realized that ozone was beginning to be depleted from our atmosphere, something called the Montreal Protocol was signed, which banned the use of CFCs. And so, despite this, 3 years later, in 1990, the concentration of chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, was at an all-time high. From there, it decreased, and the ozone layer, particularly over Antarctica, began to repair and accumulate again. But in 1990, it was at